Food has always been a reflection of the time we live in. Today's Thanksgiving table filled with turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and pies? This is really due to centuries of innovation in processing, food preservation, and farming. So if we rewind to the first Thanksgiving, the menu looks quite different. And you might be surprised to find out turkey was not the star of the show. Let's start off with the main course, because instead of the central meat being turkey, it was some type of wildfowl, most likely goose or duck. And we know this because some of the Englishmen kept diaries and records of the time. And colonist Edward Winslow actually wrote how 4 men were sent fowling and came back with enough birds to last them a week. Now, to me, fowling is actually this really fun sport of football plus bowling, but I think here he meant fowling as in like bird hunting, which I don't think I would like quite as much. This would have been the perfect season in autumn to hunt wildfowl because due to migration, they would have been abundant in the area, and hunting this type of bird was seen as a very high status type of food because it required so much effort and skill. What's interesting is that wild turkeys did roam the area. There's documents of records of just how abundant these turkeys were. Yet it seems on the day of Thanksgiving, they didn't seem to make it onto the table. We do know for certain that venison was served at the feast, and this is because one of the Englishmen, William Bradford, wrote about how the Wampanoag people carried 5 full deers to the feast. Venison was highly valued by both groups here, both because it was so flavorful, but it also symbolized respect. So bringing 5 full deers to the party was a huge contribution to this meal. Now let's talk about some side dishes. So we know that multicolored corn was definitely on the table for this first Thanksgiving. The Wampanoag people had taught the Pilgrims how to grow and harvest this crop, which saved many of their lives during this first year. It was really one of the only crops that the colonists could rely on, and we know it played a heavy role in the first Thanksgiving. Now here's where the menu really starts to diverge from the modern Thanksgiving meal. Because of the colony's location, they were right along the coast, seafood was very common and was a major part of the meal. Mussels, bass, lobster, and eels were all extremely easy to catch. There's even records that state the bay was full of lobsters all summer, and that in one night you could catch a whole hogshead of eels. Now, you might be wondering what's a hogshead, or at least I was curious, and turns out a hogshead is a real measurement. It's equivalent to 63 gallons or 240 liters. So yeah, that's a lot of eels, like a disturbingly large amount of eels. Now, what about everybody's favorite Thanksgiving dessert, pumpkin pie? The good news, they definitely had pumpkins. The bad news, they were not served in pie form, and this was for so many reasons. One, there was no oven during this first year to cook a pie in, and they also would have been lacking some key ingredients like flour, butter, and sugar. Instead, pumpkins or other types of squash were probably cooked in much simpler ways, maybe roasting, boiling, or even stewing. And pumpkins are very nutritious, and they were actually pretty easy to grow. So they became a very essential part of the Pilgrims' diet, especially as they were still adjusting to the new environment. Root vegetables like carrots, onions, parsnips, and turnips would have been plentiful at this time, but in the 1600s they would have been called potterbs or just roots, and they definitely were on the Thanksgiving table and added more of a nutritious or heartiness to the meal. But there were no mashed potatoes or sweet potato casserole because white potatoes are from South America and sweet potatoes are native to the Caribbean, neither of which would have made it to New England at this point. So you can cross both those dishes off the menu for the first Thanksgiving. Cranberries are one of the few foods that are actually native to the New England area and associated with Thanksgiving. And it's possible at this time that people ate cranberries, but definitely not as a sweet sauce, mostly because sugar would be so incredibly scarce. At the time, cranberries were more likely to be used as a natural dye or for decoration rather than being eaten. And if you've never had a fresh cranberry, count yourself lucky. They're not good. They do not taste good. You can believe me on this one. So what about stuffing? Today's bread-based stuffing would not have been possible because there was no wheat, but there may have been ways to make sort of something similar to stuffing. You know, you could use a mixture of onions, herbs, maybe even nuts to give the meat a bit more flavor. Let me give you one last fun fact, because to me, pies are such an essential part of a Thanksgiving dinner. And like I said, pies were not at the first Thanksgiving for many reasons. But eventually the settlers did start making pies. They were known as standing pies. And this is because the crust would have been based on rye, not wheat. And this rye crust is really dense and sturdy, not sort of the flaky, delicious pie crusts we have today. And so rye crust made these standing pies because they could literally stand without any pan, and they would last all winter. So the settlers would make a huge batch of these standing pies, and they would eat them all throughout winter. But these pies, they were not filled with pumpkin. They were meat and vegetable-based pies. Anything with pumpkin or fruit or those custard-styled pies, these came much, much later. And now you have some fascinating Thanksgiving history to share with your family over dinner. Perfect for filling up those awkward silences. I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, and if you enjoyed this video, next I would check out my video on designing a food supply for Mars.